All right, now let's talk about icons. So here in this folder, we have a bunch of SVG icons. Now, if you're on Mac, you can preview these icons by pressing the space button. So look, all these icons are black and they're placed on a white, or more accurately, a transparent background. However, if you look at our design mockup, you can see these icons are blue, and in some cases, they're placed on a circle with a background color. Now, the great thing about SVG files is that we can restyle them using CSS. So we don't have to supply different versions of these images. Now, before I show you how to do that, first we want to combine all these SVG files inside a sprite. We talked about image sprites in the second part of this series. An image sprite is a single image that combines multiple images. With this, we can reduce the number of HTTP requests sent to the server. So this is an optimization technique. So head over to Google and search for SVG Sprite Generator. There's so many online tools out there. There are also command line tools you can use as part of your build process. In this lesson, I'm going to use this tool, SVG Sprite.es. So take a look. Now, back to this folder. I want you to select all these files except two files, attributions.txt and logo.svg. There's a problem with this logo file. Unfortunately, the designer that I worked with to prepare these files, he didn't know much about vector graphics, so he couldn't fix the problem. Now we're going to drag and drop all these files here. Great. Now we have a SVG sprite. We can download it right here. Good. Next, we're going to add our sprite to the images folder. Good. So look, an SVG file is essentially a text file. It's not a binary file like JPEGs, GIFs, and so on. What you see here is called XML. It's short for Extensible Markup Language. It's another markup language similar to HTML, but HTML has limited elements, but XML is extensible. So we can use XML to define our own elements. SVG files have these particular elements like SVG, symbol, path, and so on. So here we have multiple symbols. Each symbol represents an icon. Now in each icon, we can have one or more paths. So these paths are essentially curves that define an icon. As simple as that. Now, we're going to go to index.html. Let's get rid of this markup. Now, back to this website. Down below, you can see examples of showing an SVG icon using this sprite. So I'm going to copy one of these elements. And don't worry if you cannot see this. I'm going to show you in a second. So we paste that here. We have this SVG element with the class of icon. We're going to define this class in a second. Now, inside this element, we have the use element with the href attribute. This attribute references an image or a symbol in a sprite. Now, here we have #WordPress. This is the ID of this symbol in our sprite. So let's go back to our sprite real quick. Look, each symbol has an ID attribute. This is exactly the same ID attribute we have in HTML. So here we have an icon called quotes, and this is based on the name of the file. Here's another icon with the ID of menu and so on. So back to this HTML, with the use element, we can use an SVG defined somewhere else. Now in this particular case, we're referencing an element with the ID of WordPress, but that element does not exist on this page. So we have to load it by referencing our sprite file. So we go to images, then sprite.svg. Make sure to spell it properly, otherwise it's not going to work. So save the changes. All right, here's what we get. So we could successfully load an icon from our sprite. Now let's work on sizing. So we go back to our style sheet and define a new section called icons. Here we're going to define the icon class. And we're going to give our icons a width of 40 pixels and a height of 40 pixels. Now take a look. Great. So that was the first step. Next, we're going to work on colors. So once again, we're going to apply object-oriented principles, and we're going to define separate skins for these icons. So we define a new class called icon primary, and here we're going to use our primary color. So we're going to use the fill property, which only applies to SVG images, and then we can type color primary. So see, I didn't have to type var, I just typed color, and using auto-completion, we got the var function, okay? Now, back to our markup. Let's add this new class, icon primary, and now our icon is blue. Great. So we can create additional classes like icon secondary, icon accent. I'm not going to create them because we don't have any use case for them at this moment. So I don't want to solve a problem that doesn't exist. This is one of the problems I see amongst a lot of developers. They try to over-engineer and solve unexisting problems. What we are doing here is building components for this design. We're not building a reusable library or a framework that other people are going to use. So I'm not going to create all variations of these icons for different sizes, different colors. That's a waste of time. We'll just end up writing extra code that has to be maintained, okay? So we have solved the problem with color. Now, let's work on this circle. So to implement this, I'm going to wrap this icon with another element. So we bring up the command palette and search for wrap. We're going to wrap this with a span with the class of icon-container. So here's what we get. We have a span with this class, and inside this class, we have an icon. Now, back to our style sheet. Let's define this new class, icon-container. Now, why am I using a single hyphen here? Well, this is not a variation or a modifier for the icon class. This is an entirely new class. And in BEM, we use a single hyphen to separate multiple words, okay? So I'm going to give our container a background of gold. This is temporary, so we can see things clearly. I'm going to give it a width of 64 pixels. And by the way, if you're wondering why I'm using pixel values here, it's because if you look at our mobile and desktop designs, our icons are always the same size. They don't change relative to the screen or the font size. So that's why I'm using an absolute unit here. Then I'm going to give the height of 64 pixels. Now to make it round, we're going to apply a border radius of 100%. Let's see what we get up to this point. We have this weird shape, which is kind of like an oval. The reason this is happening is because spans are inline elements. And as you know, width and height properties have no effect on inline elements. So here we're going to set the display to inline-block. Now, why shouldn't we use block? Well, maybe we're going to put this icon next to an element and we don't want a line break there. So that's why we use inline block. Good. So now we have a round shape, but our icon is not in the center. How can we solve this problem? Using flex. So we're going to change the display from inline block to inline flex. Now, to put the icon in the center, we're going to set two properties. Justify content for aligning along the primary axis, which is by default the horizontal axis. And then we're going to set align items to center. And this is for aligning along the secondary axis, which is by default the vertical axis. So now take a look. Beautiful. Our icon is right in the middle. The only problem is the background color. So I'm going to change this to F3, F9, FA. This is the same background color used in our design. So let's test the changes. Here's what we get. That looks great. Now, back to our markup. I'm going to remove the primary class and see what happens. So we have a black icon on this background. Once again, this is the benefit of object-oriented CSS. So we're separating structure from skin, and we have different skins, and we can combine these different skins to achieve different results. All right, we're done here. Now, let's store this markup in a separate file for reference. So back to the components folder, let's add a new file called icons.html. And then grab all this code and move it here. Great. So we're done. Now it's time for what? For reviewing our code, making sure everything's clean, and then committing into the repository. Next, we're going to build our button components.